These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down and, as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. Because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, what a big day. President Biden is going to be speaking a little later on today, basically closing the door on Afghanistan. I think a fine thing. In our third hour today, Lori Wallach is going to drop by with Global Trade Watch, talking about why vaccinating the world will save Americans too, and what we can do about that, this so-called TRIPS waiver. In our second hour, I want to get into some of the ways that Donald Trump salted the earth, an old biblical phrase that CNN used to describe what he was doing back in the weeks, actually the day of President Biden's inauguration. It's absolutely amazing the sabotage efforts, essentially, that Trump and a few of his buddies engaged in. We'll get into that in the second hour. And in this hour, I want to get into Ron DeSantis, and they just changed the way that they're calculating COVID deaths down in Florida. So the Miami Herald headline, Florida changed its COVID data, creating an artificial decline in recent deaths. It's getting weird in Florida. We'll get to that in just a moment. But right now, on the line with us is Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding. He is the formerly a faculty member and researcher at the Harvard Medical School and Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, currently an adjunct senior fellow with the American Federation of Scientists. He is an epidemiologist and health economist. I follow him on Twitter, Dr. Eric Ding, E-R-I-C-D-I-N-G, Dr. E-R-I-C-D-I-N-G, or FA Scientists, and FAS.org, the website. Dr. Feigl-Ding, welcome back to the program. First of all,
thank you.
Before we get any farther, I mentioned to you on the phone off the air that there is this National Institutes of Health, NIH.gov's link. It's a place where they publish publications that seems to say ivermectin is wonderful stuff and it'll save the world from COVID. And I've got people emailing this to me. I'm getting it in Twitter. I'm seeing it on Facebook all over the place.
Yeah.
I sent you the link. What the hell is going on here with this? Forgive my obscenity.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So first of all, the NIH website years ago, for open access purposes, double archives many journals. And these journals are either famous journals or no-name obscure journals that normally you would never see in the medical literature. And so what people are seeing is this duplicate archive of this other American Journal of Therapeutics, which I've never heard of, publication. And that's what they're seeing. It's not like a NIH study. It's not NIH endorsed. It's just a duplicate archive for open, free access purposes that the government instituted years ago. But also the problem with the meta-analysis is, A, it doesn't include the largest, newest randomized trial, I would call the Together Again trial, and it includes one of the fraudulent studies, the El-Ghazar study from Egypt, which found like basically 90% efficacy, which, by the way, in the world of drugs, nothing is 90% efficacy. Only vaccines are, and a vaccine is not exactly like a traditional drug. So it includes that. Basically, some people are saying outright fraudulent study. You can go read about it if you search the El-Ghazar fraudulent study. And they included that study. So if you include that fraudulent study, of course, it swings it down to the beneficial range. And they excluded the larger study, the Together Again study, which found absolutely no effect, which, again, one of the largest trials ever. And just so you know, in the other studies, they also found like some benefits for some of the other drugs, but not ivermectin. So there's not some systematic reason that these results are finding a null result. It really is a null result for ivermectin.
So this is like a hustle. I mean, you know, they say right at the beginning, we did a meta-analysis of other studies. But then they don't go on to say, you know, one of those studies didn't show any result for ivermectin, and the other one that did, that we are now citing all the details of, has been withdrawn because it was fully fraudulent, and the entire world has disavowed it. They failed to disclose any of that, and then they drew all these wonderful conclusions, and because this got cloned onto the NIH site, it's all over the internet.
Yeah, to some degree, it got cloned on NIH, and people are misled because they don't understand how these medical research database works. But, you know, the meta-analysis reviews what was published at the time. So at the time, it included the El-Ghazar, which has since, most of the scientific community has completely disavowed it. I'm not sure if it's fully retracted yet, but it's been disavowed and been debunked by many sources. And the newer study, which happened after they published, wasn't included. Right. So, first of all, science updates. You know, we know that there's asymptomatic transmission. You need masks, that the virus is airborne. All these things that, you know, there was controversy early on, but the science updates. And this is why you have to really follow the latest science and be very careful of some of these articles in no-name journals. Like, anyone can theoretically find a reason to cherry-pick studies and publish in a no-name journal. Honestly, there's been so much research fraud and research, you know, a controversy of selective cherry-picking that this kind of stuff happens all the time. It's also with industry study. Industry, whenever they do meta-analysis of, say, sugar or red meat, they always toss out the studies that does not appeal to the industry base. This happens all the time, and this is why you have to look at reputable journals, and you actually have to look at the reputable experts on this, not just any random analysis on the internet that is cloned on the NIH website.
Totally get it. So, what we originally asked you to come onto the program about is this new festival variant, they're calling it, from this 53,000 person event. And now there's another variant, a new COVID variant that has been detected in South Africa, apparently the most mutated so far. What is the state of things? Is there any risk, given that this is a SARS virus, that it could at some point mutate to resemble the lethality, the potential to kill of the original SARS virus that, as I recall, was around 50% fatal, or the MERS virus, the Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome virus, that is also a SARS virus that that is, as I recall, in the 20% range. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of my memory here.
Right.
Is that a concern that if we don't get the world vaccinated, or at the very least the United States, we could be looking at something that becomes much more deadly? And what's the deal with these latest variations?
Right. The new variants, these variants are still emerging. The festival variant, some people are saying, is a subtype of Delta. It's still Delta, but a subtype of Delta that they're not necessarily worse than Delta. It's just that they could tell it came from the festival because it has that, unique subtype signature. Right. That basically they know it came from the same place because of the similarity. That one's not as worrying. It is Delta, and it was a super spreading variant, but it's not as worrying as the South Africa's new C12 variant. That variant is the most mutated so far. Basically, of all the variants, this is the most genetically distant from Wuhan 1.0 strain. It has mutated the greatest distance and is mutated and arrived there by mutating at twice the rate of the average variants that's out there. So it basically had a sudden jump in mutations, and we think it was because of some immunocompromised person that probably gave the virus extra practice time to eventually evolve to that state. But it means that basically there is this acceleration of more and more variants that are jumping further and further away from the original strain. And all our vaccines, and if you were infected in early 2020, your immunity was adapted to the old Wuhan strain, which means likelihood of greater reinfection. There's also some signs that it could be more infectious. There's lots of troubling mutations in that C12 variant, which doesn't even have a Greek name, but I expect it to have a WHO-assigned Greek name very soon. But it just means that within a few years, it will evolve, the coronavirus will evolve to be so distant that our 1.0 Wuhan-adapted spike protein vaccines may not work. And also that also implies your previous natural immunity as well. So we have to be very careful. But in terms of virulence, we don't know if it's going to be more virulent and severe per se. Delta, by the way, I want to point out, is already 4 to 5 times more severe than the original strain in terms of risk hospitalizations if you're vaccinated or even one dose vaccinated. Right. So this is really, really already worrying. And if it's 5 times more, in terms of if it's more and more too severe, like 20% or 50% mortality, it becomes almost too severe for it to keep spreading. As in, if it's killed,
it becomes self-limiting. Then
its host too fast, it becomes it self dies out too quickly.
Right.
So a moderately severe but highly infectious virus, which is what Delta is actually the most dangerous.
So we're at and we have I believe just about a minute here before we're going to hit a hard break. How goes the work that you're seeing in the science with regard to adapting the vaccines to these new viruses, and or is this just going to be the new normal, what we have right now?
Well, first of all, the research says that a third shot is very effective versus a second shot, especially if it's been more than 6 months. They're also adapting vaccines to Delta. Those are underway. And also, by the way, a new study showed that Moderna, because of the timing and the dosage, could actually be a little bit stronger than Pfizer vaccine, apples to apples, against Delta. There's been 2 studies that show that it is stronger than Pfizer vaccine in a head-to-head matchup. So there's lots of things that could be seen. Boosting right now is still a really great solution. Eventually, we will need Delta or other future variant-adapted vaccines, but those are always slower than getting another booster. Hopefully, we can get out of this, and by ventilating masks in addition to vaccines. Don't just rely on vaccines alone. Do all 3 mitigations.
There you go. Wear your mask. Wear your damn mask. Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding on Twitter, DrEricDing. Dr. Feigl-Ding, thanks again for dropping by. Great talking with you.
Stay safe.
Yeah, you too. Thank you. 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with What's Up in Florida. Oh my God. What are we going to do with these people? We'll be right back. And welcome back. And Pat in Columbia, South Carolina. Hey, Pat, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, I wanted to ask you about the Supreme Court.
Sure.
Because it seems like they more about the politics than they're about the law. Because there's a lot of things that I've been watching that they making decisions that don't seem to deal with the law.
That's true, and that's been true for most of the history of the Supreme Court. And you know, we have this fiction, this story that we tell ourselves and that we teach our kids, that the Supreme Court is above politics because they have lifetime appointments. Same thing about federal judges. But in fact, they're typically they are always political appointees, and the right in particular, and this really began in a big way with the Reagan administration, have been being very strategic about finding young, hardcore, right-wing radicals that they can put on the court who will rule the way that they want. And it's the Supreme Court is now a full-blown political body, and now they're doing these shadow docket things where they're not even bothering to hold public hearings. They're not even bothering to hear arguments. They get a couple of briefs and they make a decision, and in some cases they don't even sign them. The most recent one, the 3 liberals all protested, but the 6 conservatives who pushed it through didn't even sign their opinion. It's not a good thing or a healthy thing, Pat. And I am hopeful that when President Biden's commission that is examining the Supreme Court and our federal court system comes back in the next month or 2 or 3, that one of the recommendations is that we expand the size of the court and that we do it quickly, because it has been taken over by right-wing crackpots, frankly.
But what about the 2 that the one about molesting women, and then the other one where his wife was they can't get them off the Supreme Court? Oh yeah,
well, you got Clarence Thomas, whose wife was one of the people who helped organize the Stop the Steal rally before the Capitol was attacked, apparently, and he has a long history, along with Anthony Scalia, of naked conflicts of interest that would get any federal judge thrown off a federal judgeship. Hanging out with the Koch brothers and their buddies, and all these kinds of things, and of course Thomas's wife took hundreds of thousands of dollars from right-wing groups for her work. That would disqualify anybody. But what the Supreme Court said many years ago was that they don't have to comply with the judicial code of ethics that we impose by law on federal courts, on the rest of the federal courts. So they can do things that are nakedly political. They don't have to recuse themselves. You've got Amy Coney Barrett, whose husband is deeply in bed with some of the fossil fuel companies, ruling on cases that involve those fossil fuel companies. It's just, the list of conflicts of interest is so great and so egregious, frankly, Pat, that you could write a book about. In fact, I did. the hidden history of the Supreme Court and the betrayal of America. It is terrible. So spot on. Thank you for calling and identifying that. It is something that we really need to be paying attention to. We'll be back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So there are actually some substantial differences between the Taliban, the Afghanistan Taliban, the group that has, that Donald Trump signed what his Secretary of State his Defense Secretary and his National Security Advisor referred to as surrender documents to back in early 2020. There's a difference between the Taliban and ISIS, or even K-ISIS, which is how they're identifying the ISIS group that has emerged in Afghanistan. The main difference is that the Taliban's ambitions are largely confined to Afghanistan. They want to be a regional force. They were the government of Afghanistan before. They want to be the government of Afghanistan again. ISIS, on the other hand, wants to reestablish the entire caliphate across the Middle East, across Northern Africa, across parts of Southern Europe. And this is going to bring these two into conflict. I've got a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for folks who support the program. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. COVID. So number one, if you have been bamboozled, sadly, on one of these Facebook sites or one of these other websites or whatever, by seeing, oh, hey, look at this study. This study says that it's going to be amazing that, ivermectin will save the world. It'll save millions and millions of lives. Please know that that study from that no-name journal, actually there is a name to the journal, but that study is based on a study that has been debunked and is a lie. And when you pull, and it's not even a study, it's a study of a study, or a study of studies, what's called a meta-analysis, and which is like, I'll read 5 books and then tell you what I think, sort of thing. And that if you reverse out of their data that Egyptian study, the one that started this whole ivermectin thing, saying, oh, this will solve the world's problems, and it turned out that the researchers had falsified their information. If you reverse that out of the one that's published over on the NIH site, what you find is that ivermectin is completely and totally useless. That all the other studies found it was useless, including the most recent one. And, it's like, I don't know how to convince people that they should pay attention to actual scientists. And they get just this little tiny fringe bit of, it looks official, it's on the NIH.gov website, and people are like, oh, I'll believe that instead of what, the head of the National Institute of Infectious Diseases, Anthony Fauci, has to say. Or I'll believe that instead of what, every hospital administrator and physician in the country is saying. I mean, it's just incredible. And now down in Florida, this from the Miami Herald this morning. The headline, Florida changes COVID-19 data, creating an artificial decline in recent deaths. Yesterday, or the day before, the Florida Department of Health had gone on a tweet storm criticizing the CDC. And then apparently DeSantis, made some calls or pulled some strings or whatever. And so now, instead of counting COVID deaths at the time of death, they're waiting until they get the time of death certificate, which is typically about a week later. So there's going to be this week-long pause of deaths in Florida because they've changed the way they're counting who died from COVID. It's a scam. It's just an absolute scam. Meanwhile, the Florida Department of Education announced that they are withholding money from 2 schools for allowing masks.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
To be completely accurate, I should say they are withholding money from 2 schools for mandating masks in Florida. How's this going to play out for DeSantis? Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is the second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6th, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. Why did you shoot him, sir? Asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his, quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castille's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was for him illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest, but not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, "backed them," the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, "regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation." When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, "important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing." This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those of the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. "Where's the NRA?" asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska, Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too? David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, two shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans, end quote. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson wrote that he saw the old Jim Crow whites only sign plastered above the Second Amendment. The book, The Second, by Carol Anderson. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So we've got a new video up about the Senate Leadership Fund and the Congressional Leadership Fund, the SLF and the CLF. Nice, innocent-sounding names, right? Leadership funds and Senate and Congress, but they're Republican super PACs that are taking millions and millions of dollars from fossil fuel and other dirty industries and from right-wing billionaires and recycling that money directly into the campaigns. In fact, in several cases, actually running on the ground, get out the vote efforts for Republican members of Congress, running the entire television operation for some of these members of Congress. Lauren Boebert received over $900,000 from the Congressional Leadership Fund so that she could take the 3rd District of Colorado. It's an amazing story. They spent $437 million just in the last election. This is poisoning this money, poisoning our democracy. It's all over at ThomHartmann.com. This is just incredible. Florida's Department of Education announced yesterday that they are withholding money from 2 school districts because the teachers and the administrators in those school districts said, we want to protect our students and ourselves. I mean, just let that sink in for a minute. These schools are being punished because they're asking children to wear masks during a pandemic. And it's not like Ron DeSantis doesn't know that kids are dying over this. I mean, we're averaging in the neighborhood of 1,000 deaths a day in the United States. Last week, there were over 150,000 new cases of COVID, the majority children. And DeSantis, because it's starting to spread, as we're going back to school, it's just spreading all across the country. But here's the thing. I mean, if DeSantis backs down and says, or Abbott or any of these other Republican governors, Kristi Noem, what's his name down in Mississippi, if any of them back down and say, I was wrong, you should wear masks, that is like, in Republican circles, a political death sentence. Democrats are, allowed to say I was wrong, and do from time to time. But oh no, you can never do it. You have to be right all the time, which in my mind reflects just a deep fundamental insecurity among both the politicians and the voters who vote for them. We want certainty. We want somebody who's always right. And so, Trump will lie like a dozen times a day when he was president and to this day. And it's like, oh, no, we have to believe everything he says because, he's the great God, Donald Trump. It's amazing. It's just amazing. Anyhow, Robin in Boulder, Colorado. Hey, Robin, what's on your mind today?
Oh, I've just been listening to, the last couple of days or maybe weeks about ivermectin.
You have an ivermectin story?
Yes, I do. I had horses for many years, and ivermectin is the go-to worm paste that all good, knowledgeable horse owners administer to their horses every 3 to 4 months because they're just domesticity in horses creates an awful lot of worms in their systems. And right on the label, Tom, I mean, every single person at the barn knew this label very well, where we kept horses. And it says right on the label, not intended for use in food animals, meaning that if you're going to give that to a horse or a cow that is destined for slaughter, which is a whole other thing I don't even want to discuss, you can't. They can't slaughter animals that have had this administered to them. There's a certain amount of time before it's out of the animal system, because those animals are going to be consumed by humans. I mean, you would think that with a warning label like that, people would just say, oh, if it's not good for food animals and I ingest this secondhand, this is not going to be good for me. How can it possibly be good by taking it firsthand? I mean, I'm just amazed over this.
Yeah.
It's shocking to me.
And
how did this get started? How did this get started? I mean, all of a sudden I'm hearing about ivermectin as a treatment for COVID. I'm going, where is this coming from?
Well, it's been kind of bubbling under the surface for 4 or 5 months now. We've tried to avoid discussing it on this program because I just didn't want to promote it. But now, the cat's out of the bag. I mean, it's all over. It's on the national media and everything. In answer to your question, though, Robin, and I think that's a really important question, is where did all this get started? What we have is a political party, the Republican Party, that has absolutely internalized the message that Ronald Reagan promoted, that Fred Koch was promoting back in the day through the John Birch Society, that Joe McCarthy was promoting, that you can't trust the American government. And the reason why these billionaires and their toadies have been promoting this idea since the 1950s, and this started in a big way in 1955, and that date is not a coincidence. That was when the John Birch Society really went on a tear and started this campaign to impeach Earl Warren and destroy the credibility of the U.S. Supreme Court. And that was because in 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in the Brown versus Board of Education case that it is no longer legal to have schools that are segregated by race, public schools. And at that point, the white supremacists and the billionaires, and Fred Koch was at the front of that line with his involvement with the John Birch Society, started this idea that you can't trust the government. You can't trust the government. We shouldn't be giving the government all this money. You need to cut the taxes on the really rich people. Government shouldn't be passing out welfare to unworthy moochers because that always ends up poorly. That ends up bad. We should just trust billionaires and charities for all our needs, whether it's health care or housing or whatever it may be. Leave it to private industry. Leave it to the billionaires. And then this became official doctrine in the Republican Party. It was considered fringe back in the 50s. In fact, in 1955, or 1956, I believe it was, Dwight Eisenhower, who was then president, wrote a letter to his brother Edgar, who was a hardcore right-winger, saying, should any political party ever try to get rid of Social Security and labor unions and basically trash government, we will never hear from that party again. He said there's a few billionaires down in Texas, he was referring to the Hunt brothers at the time, who think this is possible, but their numbers are small and they are stupid. That little bit of a verbatim quote from President Eisenhower. But when Reagan was inaugurated in 1980, with the help of all this money from these billionaires that was unlocked by the Supreme Court in 1976 and 78 with the Buckley and Bellotti decisions, the ones that presaged Citizens United, they set the floor for Citizens United. Reagan was elected with all this big money behind him, and in his inaugural address on January 20th, 1981, his first speech to the nation as president, he said, government is not the solution to your problems. Government, in fact, is the problem. And began this whole ideology that if it comes out of the government, you can't trust it. You can only trust stuff that comes from the billionaires or from or somebody, right? And then, during the Trump era, Trump found this very useful. Don't trust the government, even though he was running the government. I mean, it's ironic that Reagan was running the government, too. Governments that don't like democracy, the autocrats and oligarchs of countries like, Hungary or Russia or Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates or North Korea or Iran, countries that we know and the UAE, that we know are playing in the internet space here in the United States, pretending to be Americans, they are very enthusiastic about causing Americans not to trust their government because they want to see democracy fail. Democracy is a mortal threat to these billionaire oligarchs who have their own internal democracy movements. And if they can say, if the Saudis can say, or the Emiratis can say, or, fill in the blanks, right, can say, oh, look it, American democracy doesn't work. We shouldn't be trying to imitate them. We should be putting our protesters who hold up America as a value for the world, we should be putting them in prison. And, the more they can cause Americans not to trust our government, the more they succeed. That's what's going on, Robin. This is not an accident.
You know what, Tom? I can remember a time, I'm old enough to remember a time when Americans wanted to be well governed. That all changed, I guess, when Reagan got in office. In the
1970s, the Pew organization found that between 70 and 80% of Americans trusted the government to do the right thing. And this was, post-Watergate, post-Vietnam. We still trusted the government to do the right thing. In the 60s, it was even higher than that. But now it's under 20%. And it's because of this relentless effort that has been funded by right-wing billionaires, oil companies. Don't trust the government about global warming. We'll tell you the truth. Point after point. Don't trust the government that we should ban this pesticide. It's just fine. And it just goes on and on. Robin, thank you for the call. I'm sorry we're out of time. I got to run, but thank you for a very thoughtful call and your ivermectin story. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is no friggin' accident, any more than Donald Trump's efforts to sabotage Joe Biden, which I'll get into in the next hour, were any accident. And welcome back. Anna Marie in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Anna Marie, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I'm a doctor in the Bellevue area. I just spent part of yesterday starting dialysis on unvaccinated patients with COVID. Unfortunately, most of whom will survive. I wanted to answer your question as how do we make people trust in science and in government? You just covered that. And one of the biggest ways is to have single payer. Not because I've heard of arguments, it's because people are getting sick. It's to cover everyone with no requirements, no means testing. If the government is responsible for paying for your babies delivered in your family, the care of your mother and father, care of everything, then you will trust in government. Let me tell you a story. I saw a guy a week ago. He's on dialysis, was working and had a snowboarding injury and developed kidney failure. But even though he can't work and he's on Medicaid, but even he's on government assistance for his dialysis, he is what you called an unworthy moocher. He thinks he's an unworthy moocher. But if everybody got single payer and care from the very beginning, there wouldn't be any unworthy moochers. It would be for everybody. So that's why we need single payer, is for trust in government.
That was brilliant, Anna Marie, excuse me. I do recall, it's been a couple of years, but there were some studies found that people generally trust their health insurance companies, which I think is making your point. If the entity is paying for all your medical expenses and you get well, you tend to trust them.
Yeah, but the problem is it has to be everyone. As I said, this gentleman who's on dialysis because of a snowboarding injury, he trusts the deep state cabal, but he does not trust the government, even though they're providing and paying for his dialysis, because he sees himself as unworthy. Even though he's sick, he needs care, but he thinks he's mooching off the government because that's what he was taught when he worked and ran his own business. So it has to be everyone. We have to include everyone.
Yeah, I agree that healthcare should be a right. I think housing should be a right as well, as it is in most other developed, and education, higher education, as it is in most other developed countries. As a physician in Washington State, are you finding that among your patients that there is any sort of, are people talking about this, about single-payer health care, about Medicare for all? Or, I mean, I talked to my doctor about it, and he's outspokenly in favor of it. But, is this, or is that discussion not even happening really in a big way on the ground, as it were?
The discussion has changed. Before the pandemic, I'd say 80% of my patients supported single payer, even those on Medicare, even those on private insurance. But Susan Delbene, who's a wonderful congresswoman for the area I work in, told me personally that her constituents are not ready for it. I disagree. Now the conversation has changed to huge amounts of frustration with those who are unvaccinated. And I hope we don't, the whole move seems to punish these people, make them pay more, have them pay more, which will only push them further away. Right. Cover everyone. So that's what the conversation is about now. And it's so frustrating. I'm seeing people, 18-year-olds, 20s, 30s, 40s in the hospital. We're just being overwhelmed. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, amazing. Anna Marie, thank you. Thank you for the call and the reality check. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thanks for listening to KBCS. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So Rand Paul is now echoing Louis Gohmert. Remember Louis Gohmert back in the day, back in the after 9/11, when he was talking about terror babies. There's Muslims coming to the United States to have babies who will be citizens, and we can't kick them out anymore. And then they're going to grow up and they're going to be terrorists. Yeah, and we all kind of laughed at Louis Gohmert. So now Rand Paul is talking about how the Biden administration is taking kids from down at the border who may have it, COVID, and they're plucking them up and putting them all over the United States as if they're wishing to seed the country with a new variant. Right. But that's not half of it. Then he goes on to say that, for him, quote, the bottom line for those who are saying I won't go to a restaurant unless everybody's vaccinated, he says, mind your own business. Well, Rand, it is our business. Public health is all of our businesses. I've got a whole new rant about Rand Paul's bizarre take on the public good over at thomhartmann.com. It's a video. You can check it out there. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Terry in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Terry, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I just wanted to comment and ask. So we see Ron DeSantis withholding money from school districts who are just trying to keep students and staff safe. Then we find out he's invested in Regeneron. So it's like, go ahead and get sick, then use this expensive treatment, which will, line his pockets. Do you think there's more to explain this blatant attack on which, we assume that it should be the universal desire that everybody wants the health and well-being of humans and our citizens? And is there, do you think there's other connections to agendas, including money, that would explain these just completely baffling actions that he's taking, and not just him, but other Republicans?
I doubt it's money, frankly, Terry. I think that, number one, DeSantis himself is not invested in Regeneron. The hedge fund or whatever it's called that is run by or owned by one of his largest donors is a major investor or an investor, shall we say, in Regeneron. I don't know if it's one of the biggest. So it's kind of two steps removed. And I wrote an op-ed about this in which I said, if DeSantis really wanted to make money for his investor friends, Ken Buck is this guy's name, then all he has to do is accept Medicaid expansion and let Ken Buck invest in a hospital chain. More people in Florida would suddenly have health care and they'd be showing up at the doctor. So I don't think that it's the money. I think that what has happened is that the Republican Party has so internalized this message that you can't trust government. That has been being sold to us since the 1970s by right-wing billionaires and their foundations. That the GOP base has so internalized that message that DeSantis and then of course Donald Trump declared war on Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci is the face of, the Biden administration's efforts to stop COVID. And so DeSantis has to go after Fauci. Thus, he's selling, campaign literature, campaign goodies, little signs and things that say, "Don't Fauci my Florida," and stuff like that. I think it's this tribalism. I think it's just he just can't go back. And what's going to be real interesting is to see, and we're probably not going to know until next November, but to see whether this bet, this very high stakes bet that DeSantis and Abbott in particular have made, as well as a couple of other Republican governors, this bet that if they intentionally allow hundreds of children and thousands of adults to die unnecessarily in their states, that they will be rewarded by the Republican base for that. And whether, and then the other part of this, how this is going to play out, if, let's say, DeSantis gets, rewarded by the Republican base in that he wins the primary for the 2022 run for governor of Florida, will he be able to win the general election? Or for that matter, if he does and he wins the presidential primary in 2024 on the GOP side, again, because the base, it doesn't care who dies, will he be able to take on, presumably Kamala Harris or Joe Biden? And I think those are all very open questions right now. But
it's just insane.
Yeah,
what a high sacrifice for for that kind of an agenda.
It really is. It really is. It's not, almost literally insane, like psychopathic, like letting people die. Terry, thank you for the call. Patricia in Burlington, Kentucky. Hey, Patricia, what's up?
Nothing. Thanks for answering my call.
Sure.
I just wanted to add something to what the lady had said in the prior call, not right before me, but before that. I've been thinking about this for a while, and one of my thoughts is that while I have no empathy or sympathy for these people who just keep spouting off lies, I just wonder if some of the hesitancy of the vaccine and all of that stuff isn't partially because as a whole, we've been so screwed by our medical community as far as big pharma and, the doctors getting in bed with big pharma. And, I've had several instances myself where I'm like, okay, now what is this? Is this because they want money, or is this, because they really need me to do this for my health? And I just think that there's something more to that than we're maybe given it credit for, because I'm like you, I'm the first person to say, oh, no, they're just in the Trumpster cult, But that's what I wanted to say.
It's an interesting theory, and I think there's probably something to it, Patricia, because the average American, the average American family is spending $3,000 a year more for health care than any other country on earth, any other developed country on earth. And so we're getting screwed, and we know it. And we also pay twice as much for drugs, and now we've got the big pharma companies advertising on TV that allowing Medicare to negotiate drugs is going to take away your drugs if you're on Medicare, which is a complete lie.
Yeah. I saw that.
Yeah. So it makes sense that people are starting to go, well, who do I trust? But and so who do you turn to? Well, you should turn to the experts that are employed by government. But we've got 50 years now of right-wing billionaires telling us, don't trust government. They just want to raise taxes on billionaires. And they just want to regulate big fossil fuel companies so that they, can't spout poisons. And that we don't want that. That's not a good thing.
Right.
And so.
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed message there.
The perfect phrase. Yes, it is a very mixed message. Patricia, thank you. I think you may be onto something. It's kind of all of this stuff, in my opinion. We'll continue our conversation, and also what Donald Trump did and is continuing to do to salt the earth for Joe Biden.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
We're reading today from Truth in Our Times by David E. McCraw, Deputy General Counsel of the New York Times, the #2 lawyer for the New York Times. This is from Chapter 1, titled Election Day. It opens with a tweet from Donald Trump. The failing New York Times has been wrong about me from the very beginning. Sadly, I would lose the primaries. Oh, said I would lose the primaries on the general election. Fake news. November 8, 2016. At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan remained in doubt, but the reality was sinking in. Donald Trump was on the verge of winning the American presidency. I'd been in newsrooms on election nights before. I know how it's supposed to be. The only thing that ever mattered was the horse race, think Gore-Bush, or the historic moment, think Obama-McCain. There was no investment in which candidate was winning. He or she was destined to disappoint in the long run. And the dominant emotion was a certain not quite cynical detachment amid the electric buzz of the vote count and projections and the anticipation of relief that the endless push of the campaign was finally over. Sure, you couldn't ignore the victories or the big picture moments, and the day after stories would be celebratory in their way, duly restrained, but with a nod to victory itself. Not unlike the next day account of a Super Bowl game or Game 7 of the World Series. Capture the triumph for a night or relish the race too close to call. Leave the dancing and crying for others, for the believers. But this night was like no other election night. There had been an investment, not just journalistic, but spiritual. Donald Trump had campaigned not just against Hillary Clinton, but also against the New York Times and the American press, the mainstream American press. And his astonishing rise to the top of the Republican Party had been built on his near-daily attacks on facts, on the very idea that facts matter. For journalists who approach truth like a secular religion and who have seen 1,000 times how a single true story could gut the political career of a lying politician, it had been a year of faith-shaking disbelief. A line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. The shock was palpable as the numbers came in, laced for some with the fading hope for a different outcome among people who generally wanted nothing more than a story worth telling. And there was still a paper to put out, a reckoning to account for. It was too much on an already long night. I slipped away. At the elevators, I ran into Sue Craig and a guy who was obviously not from the Times. Sue had broken one of the biggest stories of the campaign. She was the one who went to her mailbox one day in September and found pages from Donald Trump's tax returns in an envelope. She introduced me to her acquaintance. He had once worked for Trump. I didn't ask why he was there. Like me, Sue had decided to get away. It's too weird here, she said. We all got on the elevator. Sue, who had written a devastating story about Trump, me, whose letter to Trump's lawyers had lit up the internet for a week in October, and one of Trump's guys. We rode in silence, a strange tableau on the strangest night of the year. 14 hours earlier, as I came into the building, the Times security guard had called me over. They wanted to make sure I knew about the plans for the next morning. In the quirky ways that things happened at the Times, I had become the lawyer to see for all the things that security guys encountered, from the intruder who pilfered women's shoes to the anonymous letter weaponized with razor blades. The Times was printing thousands of extra newspapers, and tables were going to be set up outside for all the people who would be showing up to buy the New York Times for posterity's sake. The headline, I later learned, was going to read, Madam President. We had been caught flat-footed 8 years earlier when Barack Obama had made history. By the time I arrived for work early in the morning of the 2008 election, the line was already starting to snake down the sidewalk. Soon there were hundreds of Obama supporters who thought, and why wouldn't they, that the place to buy a copy of the New York Times was surely at the New York Times. Lots of things happen at the Times building. Selling newspapers is not one of them. Employees were pressed into emergency duty to cart bundles of newspapers from the Times printing plant in Queens, and the long lines outside the building stretched on into the afternoon. But it was Obama's victory in 2012 that was on my mind this morning. I vote in a neighborhood that is predominantly black and middle class. In 2012, following a drumbeat of stories about how Republicans hoped to suppress voter turnout, I walked into my polling place at a local school 8 minutes after it opened. The line already extended back to the schoolhouse door. "Did y'all sleep here?" a guy wanted to know as he stepped into the foyer. On this morning in 2016, I had arrived before dawn. I was the only one in line at my precinct's table. That all seemed like a strangely distant memory as midnight approached. I had made my escape from the building with Sue and the Trump guy. At home, I sat alone in the glow of the TV screens as the states that mattered fell into place for the Republicans. I turned it off. Donald Trump was about to become president of the United States. The next morning, in a light drizzle on a gray November day, the newspaper sales tables were set up outside the building as planned. No one stopped. The vendors sat idly amid the stacks. There was no Madam President front page. Instead, the headline read, "Trump triumphs," and the first two paragraphs of the lead story talked about how the vote threatened convulsions throughout the country and made an early mention of those who had watched with alarm the rise of Trump. Nearly half the country had voted for the man. I had just spent a weekend in October back in rural Illinois, in my hometown, and for a moment I allowed myself to see the coverage through the eyes of the rest of America, where, at least for this one night, his victory represented a certain kind of hope that change was going to come at last. Truth in Our Times by David McCraw.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. In my rant today, the title over at HartmannReport.com is Trump Salted the Earth, and I put that in quotes, against Biden to get chaos, revenge, and profit. And I know that this is a partial list, but I think it's worth revisiting and amplified, because this is really a strategy, for lack of a better word. I mean, let's start off with salt the earth. This is a phrase. This was in a CNN report about a week after the election, or a couple weeks after the election. It was back in November of last year. And the authors of the report on CNN said some observers, pointing to Trump's rush to pull troops out of Afghanistan over unanimous objections from the military's most senior leaders, as well as NATO commanders, question whether the president and his officials are trying to salt the earth for Biden. Salt the earth? Well, most people have never heard of Abimelech, but, outside of people who are very carefully read the book of Judges back in the day, or, our yeshiva or biblical students. But Abimelech was the son of Gideon, the guy that after whom all those Bibles are in the hotels all over the place. Gideon was one of the kings of Israel. Abimelech was one of his sons. He stole all the wealth of the other sons and then killed them. He was sort of that generation's Donald Trump in a way. And they seized this town, town called Shechem. It's near it's on the road between Jerusalem and Nazareth, going north of Jerusalem. Maybe an hour's horse ride or whatever north of Jerusalem. He sees this town, and as it says in Judges 9:45, Abimelech fought against the city all that day, and he took the city and slew the people that was therein, and beat down the city and sowed it with salt. Now, what that's referring to, and this isn't the only historical reference to sowing fields with salt, but it's one of the more well-known ones. What they're referring to is that after you've defeated a people, if you want to just absolutely and utterly destroy them, you pour salt on their fields, and nothing can grow there for, in some cases, 100 years or longer. You know how long it takes for the rain to eventually wash the salt out, because salt is toxic to plants. So it kills the ability to grow crops. It kills the ability to grow trees. It'll kill the trees. You can't even grow grass on salted soil. And that's what Donald Trump tried to do to Joe Biden. After it became obvious that he had lost the election, he has ordered the Taliban, or he has ordered, Pakistan to release from prison the former co-founder of the Taliban, who is now the leader of the Taliban inside Afghanistan, to release this guy, along with 5,000 of the most vicious of the fighters that they had, many of whom now have joined ISIS, apparently. And, this ISIS-K, which is now taking on the Taliban government in Afghanistan. This is going to be the next big battle in Afghanistan. It's not going to be between the Taliban and us. It's going to be between the Taliban and ISIS, and it's going to be ugly. So Trump orders these guys released. He cuts out the government. The Ghani government, Ashraf Ghani was the democratically elected president of Afghanistan. He cuts him out of the loop. Says, sorry, I'm going to negotiate this as president of the United States directly with the Taliban, a group that didn't even have a country. I'm going to negotiate with them. We let their leader out of prison. I'm going to negotiate with them. To hell with what the government in Afghanistan wants or thinks. And then his advisors came back to him, specifically Mark Esper, his Secretary of Defense, came back to him and said, don't do that. In fact, Esper, later talked about it. He said, my concern was that President Trump, by continuing to want to withdraw American forces out of Afghanistan, undermined the agreement, which is why I objected and formally wrote a letter to him, a memo based on recommendations from the military chain of command and my senior civilian leadership, that we not go further, that we not reduce below 4,500 troops unless and until conditions were met by the Taliban. Otherwise, we'd see a number of things play out which are unfolding right now. This is what Mark Esper said like 2 weeks ago. But he was Trump's Secretary of Defense. And he said, if you're going to give this country to the Taliban, get something in exchange for it. Like, they're going to protect our people, or they're going to allow girls to go to school or something. But Trump was like, no. I lost the election. Joe Biden is going to come in. We want to hand him hell on a platter. And he did. He salted the earth of Afghanistan, metaphorically. Same thing with the COVID vaccines. Donald Trump put his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, the son of convicted swindler, Mr. Kushner, I forget his first name, Jared's dad, the one who ensnared Jared's uncle, his brother, his dad's brother, by sending a hooker over to his house so that he could videotape that and send pictures to his wife. I mean, this is just a weird family. And Jared Kushner, when his dad got out of jail, his advice to Jared was buy a newspaper, buy a big, high-profile, fancy, important building so people will take you seriously in Manhattan, and marry a very rich woman. And Jared Kushner did all three. He bought a newspaper. It's called the New York Observer. It's an obscure little New York newspaper. He paid $1.1 billion for about an $800 million building, 666 Fifth Avenue, an old office building that is now way past its prime. And he married Ivanka Trump. Trifecta. So what was happening was he bought that building on credit. And the banks were saying, you know, that loan has now expired. You owe us $1 billion. So Jared goes over to the Middle East and says to the Saudis and the Emiratis, the UAE, you know, help me out here. I need and the Qataris, I need some money. I need $1 billion. And the Saudis and the UAE, they say, well, get it from Qatar. They're American allies. You got a big military base there. And the folks in Qatar say, we're not going to give Jared Kushner $1 billion. Are you crazy? And so the Saudis and the UAE, do this embargo. They cut off the supply lines, the food supply lines to Qatar. Qatar's this little peninsula, sticking out into the Arabian Sea that's, attached essentially to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And they barricaded them until finally Qatar said, okay, we'll give Jared the $1 billion. And they did. Or at least an investment company that they're heavily invested in did. So back to my story, Jared was put in charge of the vaccine distribution, right? The whole Operation Warp Speed thing. But Jared was busy trying to work out the final deals of this $1 billion deal to bail him out of this failing building in New York City and the rest of his landlord business. He owns a bunch of low-income housing. He's a slumlord. And so Jared never made any plans to distribute the vaccine. This is a vaccine that requires dry ice. Right? It's got to be kept 80 degrees below zero. That was the Pfizer. The other one, the Moderna, has to be kept at at near freezing temperature, below freezing temperatures, below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So logistically, it's going to be complicated. How do you stage and how do you distribute these vaccines to millions of Americans? And so when Biden wins the election, he reaches out to the transition people in the White House and says, okay, what's going on with Afghanistan? And what's going on with the vaccines? And Trump and Kushner and everybody in the Trump administration said, screw you, we're not going to tell you a thing. And it wasn't until January 20th, the day that Joe Biden was sworn into office and walked over to the White House and discovered the door was locked. It wasn't until January 20th that the Biden administration discovered how bad they had been screwed, how the earth had been salted. Politico wrote a piece about this on Inauguration Day, January 20th. Quote, the Pentagon blocked members of President Joe Biden's incoming administration from gaining access to critical information about current operations, including the troop drawdown in Afghanistan and the COVID-19 vaccine distribution program. And when Mark Esper, Trump's Secretary of Defense, said, hey, you're giving Afghanistan to the Taliban and you're getting nothing in return and you're doing it in a way that's going to hurt American interests, Trump fired him and replaced him with Chris Miller. Chris Miller, who you may recall is the guy who wrote the memo that said when he wrote this memo on January 4th saying that on January 6th there's going to be this big event at the U.S. Capitol and you may not, Washington, D.C. National Guard, you may not go and help the D.C. Capitol Police or the D.C. Metro Police. You may not. Chris Miller was the guy who repeatedly was receiving phone calls. He was the Secretary of Defense, repeatedly receiving phone calls from members of Congress, from the governor, Larry Hogan, the Republican governor of Maryland, calling him, saying, can I send my National Guard if you won't let the D.C. National Guard go in? Miller, nope, can't do that. Until it was reported that Trump's stormtroopers had failed in their mission to hang Mike Pence, execute Nancy Pelosi, and hijack the Electoral College ballots. When the word came out that Pelosi and Pence were safe and the ballots were intact, that was the point at which finally the Secretary of Defense, Trump's handpicked guy, says, okay. And he's still salting the earth with promoting ivermectin and all these weird cures and just generally trashing Biden at every turn. When does this stop? Will it stop?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Is this the fate and future of America, that we are constantly under attack from within one of our two largest political parties? And welcome back. Excuse me. Rick in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Rick, what's up?
Well, I'll tell you. One question I have for you, actually 2 points. 1 point is, whatever happened about the arresting the 52 Democrats? I haven't heard any more about it. But
I'm sorry? Say it again.
The 52 or so Democrats here in Texas that were supposed to be arrested, and the Supreme Court, I believe, said they were supposed to be arrested. Yeah. And I haven't heard any more about it, but what can they possibly charge them with? Are they just trying to harass them? Or, yes. I mean, is this really possible, or what?
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, they haven't been arrested. They did, a few of them came back. They were able to hold their session. They've passed the law. The governor, I think, is probably going to sign it today. As far as I know, there's going to be it was a lot of Sturm and Drang, a lot of talk and hysteria.
Well, the second quick point is, luckily I have a thing like Facebook, and I put on there, because my local school district is not, how the kids do not wear masks, and I put on, yes, optional right now, but down the road they need to be seriously considered about masks, considering the high rate in places like Texas and Florida where nobody wears masks. And within 1 hour, I got like 50 responses against, well, how dare you, kind of thing. You're forcing our kids you're being mean to our kids, and if we don't have a mask, it's going to kill them. Within 1 hour, I got 50 responses.
Yeah, and I guarantee you a lot of those responses were not from local parents.
Yes, that's very, very, very believable.
There's an absolute troll army out there that do not represent parents. There are some concerned parents who are misguided or who are misinformed and who are very upset, and we have to acknowledge that. But there's also this just, I don't know what to call it beyond that, this troll army out there that, and frankly, I suspect that many of them are not even Americans.
Yeah. Very good. Yep, I would certainly agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, Rick. Good to hear from you. Gary in Alpharetta, Georgia. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Hello, Thom Hartmann. Thank you.
Hey, Gary. Greed has no heart. You're just north of where I used to live. We used to live in Roswell. You're just right up the road.
I know you did. We talked about that. I know it's kind of ironic.
So what's up?
True. So 3 things, if I may, quickly.
We have a minute.
As I can. America is, and this is in the context of what you're saying, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, America is much, much more than greed, egos, and trying to be famous. And in my humble view, we must, it's essential. We've got to move forward and turn back this challenge, and you're talking about, that government is the problem. Government isn't the problem. Guess what, folks? Government gave me Social Security. It gave me Medicare. It gave me good roads and bridges. There's still a lot of them out there. It gave me freedom, a lot of my freedoms. So we must turn back this, and you have addressed it. I'm just maybe saying it a little differently. We must change this developing momentum towards government being the problem. Yeah. It's wrong, and we got to stand up for it.
Well, they used to teach in school, when you and I were kids, Gary, they taught us that we, the people, created the government to provide for our needs, right? For liberty and justice for all and all that kind of stuff.
And can I say one more thing?
Quickly.
I sent you a cover thing, email that Greed Has No Heart, America's Core Challenge. That's your new book I'm trying to get you to write.
Okay, I'll have to look for it. Gary, thank you for the call. It's 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. We have a new video over at thomhartmann.com for the folks who support our program, and it's this one's a geeky science one. And it's about this little snippet of genetic material, what's called microRNA. And the name of this one is called MIR1, M-I-R-1. And we've known for years that when muscles are used, I'm talking about, you know, exercise to the point where you feel fatigue in your muscles, that when when muscles are exercised, it depletes them of MIR1. What they didn't know is where that MIR1 goes and what it does. And it turns out that our fat cells draw the MIR1 in from the muscles, and it causes the fat cells to start converting themselves into fatty acids that can be used to feed the muscles. So we're not just building muscle, but we're also reducing fat in our body. It's absolutely fascinating. I'm going into depth on it in this new video. It's over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. 24 minutes past the hour. It's even worse than what I just laid out. You know, I just laid out how Donald Trump is salting the earth, right? And you know, against Biden to get chaos and revenge and profit. And so far, he's avoided the final fate of Abimelech, who, by the way, was brought down by a woman. Abimelech was, laying siege to a tower, and this woman dropped a stone from the top, and it hit him on the head, so that was the end of Abimelech. And Trump's got a long list of women who might bring him down. We'll see. I mean, who knows? I'm not, wishing any kind of physical violence on him, certainly, but politically or legally. But how do we cope not just with traitors like Donald Trump, but this movement that is happening within the Republican Party? We have, for example, U.S. Representative Congressman Madison Cawthorn. He's a Republican from North Carolina, a veteran. He's in a wheelchair. Prior to that, he was accused of sexual assault and a whole bunch of other things. He has recently, basically, he was after holding. I'll just read to you from this piece over at rawstory.com. The North Carolina Republican lawmaker was warned to stop campaigning across the country and start paying attention to his own constituents. On Sunday, the Washington Post reports, Cawthorn told his local Macon County Republican Party, quote, that elections in the United States are rigged and there will be bloodshed if the country's electoral system continues on its current path. Immediately after holding a shotgun, Cawthorn said, I'll tell you, as much as I'm willing to defend our liberty at all costs, there is nothing I would dread more than having to pick up arms against a fellow American. And the way that we can have recourse is that if we all passionately demand that we have election security in all 50 states. Right. So, and then he goes on to say, I will remove Joe Biden from office, and then Kamala Harris, when she inevitably screws up, will take them down one at a time. And then he referred to the people who are in jail for January 6th as political prisoners and political hostages. Now, there are people who are calling for this guy to be expelled from Congress, along with a few of his buddies, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jim Jordan and others. What do we do with politicians who are openly, trashing our government and implicitly calling for violence?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Your thoughts right after this break. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This from the introduction, titled The Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre, not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name: the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, "Oh, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control." With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy. And it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. We'll repeal the Second Amendment by Alan J. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So for our Thom Hartmann Insider videotape that is over, or videotape, YouTube, whatever you want to call it, private video that's available over at ThomHartmann.com, I'm talking this week about Donald Trump just completely giving in to Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, the dictator of Turkey now. And this theory that Jared Kushner okayed the killing, at least the capture, perhaps the killing of Jamal Khashoggi and to Mohammed bin Salman, and that Erdogan has the tape of it, and that when he called up Donald Trump a couple weeks ago and said, I want you to pull out of Syria and give me those Kurds so I can kill them and take that land, that he did it because Erdogan threatened him. And then Erdogan comes to the United States, a week or two later and gets a whole state dinner thing. Check it all out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. I think you'll find it fascinating. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. First of all, Madison Cawthorn, I said was a vet. I was wrong. I had seen. I swear I saw an ad for him at one point in time that talked about military service. Apparently, he was in a car accident, which is why he's in a wheelchair. And he tried to get it, but before his car accident, he tried to get into the Naval Academy, and they turned him down. Thank you to numerous people on Twitter who have corrected me on that. If they did just 5 minutes of investigation, they would also note he was not accepted into the Academy prior to the accident, just had Daddy call in a favor for a letter of recommendation, writes Jen, the overly privileged woman. For example, one of many. Thank you. Thank you for that. I was wrong. And I want this show to be absolutely bulletproof, no pun intended. If I say something, I want you to be able to take it to the bank. So thanks for that. Also, somebody tweeted to me this story. This is from last month, CNN Politics. The headline, Ted Cruz is blocking diplomats from being confirmed, and it has nothing to do with their qualifications. 6 months after Biden's inauguration, just 6 State Department candidates have been confirmed on the Senate floor. Some 60 nominees have been awaiting confirmation for months. Now Ted Cruz has effectively stopped the Senate from voting on senior State Department nominees unless Democrats take the time-consuming steps needed to overcome a filibuster for each nomination, leaving around a dozen offices without confirmed leadership. Ted Cruz is salting the ground. These guys are all about sabotage. Sabotage the government. It started out with the right-wing billionaires back in the day in the 70s and 80s saying sabotage the government so that if the government won't tax us anymore and so that the government won't regulate our businesses anymore. And then it became sabotage the government so the government can't protect labor unions anymore. And then it became sabotage the government so that the government can't prevent us from pouring poisonous mining waste in the rivers and coal ash and poisonous fumes into the air. I mean, it's just like this nonstop, like the treason party or something. It's just breathtaking. Absolutely breathtaking. Anyhow, Will in Chicago, it says you disagree with me, so you go to the front of the line. What do you disagree about, Will? Will is apparently not there. Jeremy in Indianapolis. Hey, Jeremy, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, you were saying that yesterday you're wondering how long the Republicans could hold out, and you were also saying earlier that you think Ron DeSantis is just afraid of the base, and I don't think that he's just afraid of the base. I think that things have become so corrupt now that it's possible that these Republicans are actually afraid of ending up in prison because there's blackmail on them that could be expose them, or they could end up.
But why would that prevent DeSantis from simply saying, this new Delta variant is a whole lot more deadly than the original one, and so in the face of changing science, I'm going to change policy? Well, why? Who would blackmail him not to do that?
Somebody who wants to destroy the United States and bring us to our knees.
So you think this is being driven by foreign oligarchs?
Possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't rule that out.
They got blackmail on them, and they don't care. It's not, DeSantis might have gotten into it, and other politicians might have gotten into it for whatever their reasons, like political reasons. Maybe they want to make change. Maybe they believed in the message. Maybe they, wanted to make money, whatever. But now, there was the hacks on the DNC and the RNC, and the DNC stuff got released. The RNC stuff didn't. And I keep thinking about, there's this, I have a hard time saying the word documentary, but I don't know what else to call it. A while back ago called Bohemian Grove. Have you heard of this?
Yeah, I haven't seen the documentary, but I'm real familiar with the Bohemian Grove. A friend of mine's father used to be a member, and Henry Kissinger drunkenly peed on his shoe once. They sit in the woods out in California and have bizarre rituals, and it's basically a summer camp for rich and powerful people.
Right. Well, I have this sense of these organizations there's the Bohemian Grove. I don't know if you call it an organization, but Freemasons, fraternities and things. They're really big on secrecy. And the draw is you get a family, and but we're going to teach you all these super secrets of the universe or
Skull and Bones
God or whatever.
Yeah.
But what secrecy really do? It lets you do things like, what we're really doing in their Freemasons lodge is watching strippers and sleeping with hookers. And then somebody gets in political office, and it's like, hey, remember that time you slept with that hooker or that underage girl? Hey, why don't you do me a favor?
Right. It's possible. It's possible. I'm not sure, though, that that explains why Ted Cruz is trying to block Biden administration from staffing the State Department during a time of international crises. I think that
the goal is chaos.
Exactly. That's where I was going with that. I think he's just trying to produce political chaos in the United States so that Biden will get blamed for it, so that when Ted Cruz runs for president in 2024, and he's going to do that, he will have a chance to take down Joe Biden if he can get the nomination. This is what they're all about.
They're killing their own constituents and having them take things like ivermectin, which is also deadly and such. And their constituents aren't going to be able to vote. They're not trying to get votes anymore. They're not trying to win on policy anymore. They're trying to create enough chaos to bring us to our knees so that we're no longer a political power in the world, and so that somebody else can take that, that status. It's what I'm hypothesizing here.
Or not even that somebody else can take the status of being the world's largest superpower, although China certainly seems to be moving in that direction. But although not so much militarily so far, which is, so far a good thing. But rather to put down democracy movements within their own countries that are using the United States. When Tiananmen Square happened in, I believe it was 89, when Tiananmen Square happened, those protesters carried a 12-foot tall papier-mâché version of the Statue of Liberty into Tiananmen Square before they were slaughtered. We were the beacon to the world. If they can then say to the world, if the Chinese government can say to the world, if the Russian oligarchs can say to the world, if the Saudi kings and the emir of the United Arab Emirates can say to the world, that democracy thing, it doesn't work. Just look at America. You don't want that kind of a mess, do you? If they can say that, then they ensure their own safety. It's not about necessarily wanting to be Napoleon and conquering the world. I think it's about protecting their own safety. It's a very real possibility. Jeremy, I got to get another call in here. Thank you for the call. Larry in Los Angeles, you have some theories here, Larry?
This is not theory. This is reality.
Go for it.
Donald Trump has engineered two insurrections. Well, one of them was in America. That one failed. But he also engineered the insurrection that happened in Afghanistan. He, as you have been pointing out, he engineered the fact that the Taliban would gain in numbers by releasing 5,000 Taliban fighters. Those 5,000 Taliban fighters then released more Taliban fighters.
Yep.
And also they
just released a couple thousand ISIS fighters.
Yes, ISIS-K. And then ISIS-K killed Americans.
Yeah.
There's
13.
a direct line from what Donald Trump did to the death of 13 Americans in Afghanistan.
Yep.
And there's no one on the media that's pointing this out. I watched them this morning. All of them will get right up to the point where they'll say, and the Taliban released ISIS-K, but they won't tell you how they were able to do that.
Right.
And the media is basically trying to continuously keep Donald Trump in the loop by not pointing out his crime.
It's a weird thing, Larry, and it almost seems like it's a deference to power. It's like, why isn't the media pointing out that George W. Bush lied us into Afghanistan in the first place? That it was an absolutely unnecessary war, that the Taliban, after a week of our bombing Afghanistan, the Taliban said, we will arrest bin Laden. Don't worry, everything's good. And we said, no, we want to have a 20-year war with you guys. Why is that not being pointed out? Why is it not being pointed out that Obama knew that the war was lost? That by the third year, Bush knew that the war was lost, and he continued it going. 8 years, Obama knew the war was lost, kept it going. Trump, for 4 years, knew the war was lost. I mean, the war was lost, as James Carville said yesterday, it was lost more than 15 years ago. And Trump knew that, too. And nobody wanted to take responsibility for ending it on their watch. And Trump, dumped this in Biden's lap in a way that was guaranteed to cause a crisis. I mean, that was his intention. Mark Esper resigned as defense secretary over this. And it's nobody wants to talk about this.
I have a slightly different take on that, and that is yes, Afghanistan was going to be difficult. But when you get a corrupt American president and you put that on top of a corrupt Taliban establishment in Afghanistan, not Taliban, but the Afghanistan administration was also corrupt.
Yeah,
there's no way that's going to come out well.
Yeah.
Number one. And number two, see, even with the corruption in Afghanistan, there was no reason that the Afghan government would fall except that Donald Trump set it up to fall.
Yep. He cut the Ghani government out of the loop and negotiated directly with the Taliban leader that he had ordered released from prison, who was the co-founder of the damn Taliban.
Yes. He had to get somebody of stature in order to surrender to.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah, he let him out of prison so he could surrender to him. Exactly right, Larry.
Stagecraft.
Larry,
That's
thank you.
That's what he's all about. It's just stagecraft.
There you go. 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your thoughts and mine on salting the earth right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And perhaps the bigger question that I haven't even raised, but I'll toss it out there, is how do you unsalt the earth? How do we undo the damage that Donald Trump has done? Is it even possible? And welcome back. Carl in Seattle. Hey, Carl, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Thanks, Tom. I have a comment about something that happened the other day. And you're my age. Back in the Vietnam era, we protested the war. We even took over the principal's office for whatever reason. We just wanted to protest, and we were just angry and stuff. In fact, on the bus to high school, I argued all the time with we should be there or not. And I finally ended up getting the Pentagon Papers in the paper. I started reading it off, and they didn't want to hear it. Mm-hmm. But that was a long time ago. That was 50 years ago. We took our people out of Saigon. It was only Americans, and we took no Vietnamese. 800,000 ended up dying because they had to go to Cambodia. They took on boats. They did this, and there was a big loss of life. Compare that to today. Biden stops the war correctly. He had to do it. 20 years is enough. And then he brings 125,000 Afghans in, flies them all in, doing the right thing. And now McCarthy and these guys want to impeach him. I think they didn't even. There was no conversation about that when Ford announced withdrawal.
Yeah.
This just tells you how long and how hurtful this party has gotten from your dad's party and Eisenhower's party, which I remember, and now we got Trump and the nutcases running the show. I think that the contrast is amazing, but I don't think people even remember that. Yeah. I think people lost their history. They're too busy doing their lives. Don't care, they got their nice car and house and vacations and stuff. And I think we've just lost our ways because I don't think history and even current affairs in high school. I remember that was one of my favorite classes. We had there was an election going on. We had a guy we supported. We debated and all that. It's a long time ago now. People have forgotten. Most of these people I see on the news, on the TV, they're all young guys. They weren't there. I remember distinctly a Vietnam War, every inch of it,
Yeah. Oh,
I dodged the draft,
I got kicked out of high school for publishing an anti-war newspaper that we were distributing on a high school property. And, the kicked out of high school part made it to the Wikipedia page, but for publishing an anti-war newspaper somehow didn't make it to the Wikipedia page. And you can't edit your own Wikipedia page, so, which is rather frustrating. But in any case, I remember those times. I remember. And there were a hell of a lot of us who were standing up and speaking out. And it's I'm blithering here, Carl, but it's we didn't learn the lesson of Vietnam. Lyndon Johnson did lie us into a war. You can't occupy countries over the long term. George Bush lied us into a war. President Polk lied us into the into the Mexican-American War. He said that we were under attack from Mexico. I mean, this is not the first time this has happened, and you would think that Americans would eventually figure out that maybe Congress should exercise war powers, actual declarations of war, and they should do it based on evidence that has been at least vetted.
You just look at America. Has it worked for us? We lost Vietnam. We lost Afghanistan.
All right.
Korean War was a tie. Why do we keep doing this to ourselves? And it's really sad. It makes me sad, and people are just ignoring it. I text my friends, no response, no big deal. As well, it is to me.
Yeah, I'm with you. Carl, thank you for the call. Good talking to you. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election to the Trump family's collusion with Russia to Ivanka Trump's trademarks to federal spending at Trump properties to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. It is 8 minutes before the hour, and let's see here. Wesley in Huntington, West Virginia. Hey, Wesley, what's on your mind?
Hi, how do you do, Thom Hartmann? My name is Wesley Lawrence Curry II. Wow, that Mecca, turn it to dust. Those Muslim armies, just drop them. Walk away unharmed with the children. That Chinese Navy that's going to attack through California.
Wesley, thanks a lot. Nice punk attempt, but no cigar. Vincent in Binghamton, New York. Hey, Vincent, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, good Lord.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Anyways,
it happens.
Hey, Tom, before you talked about what are we going to do with that Republican senator, they're down there talking, there's same old dribble. I had said I wish that Joe Biden, and I'm sure he knows this, but I need to say it, I hope he realizes that our media has changed since he's been gone. Even that short period, 4 years, our media has changed. And I wish he would borrow something from the past and the way James Carville was with Clinton. You need a guy out there that can get on these Meet the Press shows on Sunday and start giving this information, as Joe Madison says, where the goats can get it.
Yeah.
And you need to have somebody that will attack MSNBC, CNN, and Fox, and all these places when they start saying about, Donald Trump is still there, and, he has his base. And you need somebody to say, what base? Where are these people going to go? Rand Paul, Lindsey Graham, Ben Carson? These people have no place to go. The Republican Party has nothing to offer them. This is the time where Democrats have to get rid of this bipartisanship mentality. I'm sorry, guys. This is what we have to do.
Yeah.
We have to take it all. It is not the president. The most the president can do is 8 years. We've got to go to the Congress. They're the ones that are doing it. These are the people that have all these laws. And I'll give you a perfect example. I just read in Forbes magazine, Republican senators have now demanded there be a full count of U.S. military equipment left in Afghanistan. They are humiliated. It's a high-tech military equipment paid for U.S. taxpayers has fallen into the hands of Taliban and terrorist allies and lawmakers, securing United States assets and blah, blah, blah. My question is this, you senators, you Republican senators, didn't you guys sign the check in the budget?
Well, and not only that,
year,
where were you when Trump was closing 10 U.S. Air Force bases and leaving all this stuff behind?
Yeah, where were you guys? You guys sign the check every year. The Pentagon comes up. Oh, we got a helicopter that kind of skips. Oh, here we go. Here's $140 trillion, and they go on off, and we say nothing about it. And now you want to worry about some of this equipment's been there for 20 years.
Yeah.
For the last 4 years, where have you been, MSNBC and CBS and Fox? We have no idea. I didn't know we had foreign correspondents anymore. You guys never covered it. You were listening to Donald Trump Review, which has had bad reviews. This is where you've been.
No, I get it, Vincent, and you said it very, very well. And I do hope that the Biden administration can find, a plain-speaking, outspoken James Carville type who can be, part of the face of the administration. Jen Psaki is doing a great job, by the way. But this is a whole different thing. They basically need a surrogate, and I'm guessing one will eventually emerge. Gary in East Lansing. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Hi. I just have to say that I believe if Trump was still in office and considering the way the Republicans don't want to let any Afghans in the country, that he would have just withdrawn all the troops and left everyone. So all the debate about how many people are left behind is not even really a true discussion.
That was the deal he cut, Gary, was that on April 30th, we were gone, period, full stop.
Right.
And there were no preconditions. We were not going to get our equipment out of there. We were, it's just like, we're just leaving. And Taliban, it's all yours. And again, like I said, he cut the Ghani government out of the negotiations. Now, I'm not saying that we should have stayed in there longer, but if Donald Trump was interested in protecting American interests, he would have started moving equipment out while he was still president. He would have started moving, translators and people who are affiliated with us, particularly in the hinterlands, while he was still president. Instead, he avoided doing any of that. He was salting the earth. He was trying to create chaos for Joe Biden. And now, as you point out, you've got Republicans yelling about it.
None of the news outlets are saying anything about it.
Right. Yeah. Well, and this is this just like bizarre deference to presidents. It's like somehow we just don't want to point out that our presidents, may have feet of clay. Or may have even, lied or even made mistakes. Gary, thank you. Oh, my. We will continue with the program right after this break. Lori Wallach is going to drop by. We're going to talk about vaccinating the world, and then I will be getting right back to your phone calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword, at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You've reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified, we have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up
and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2, natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a Lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home? A temple to the new India or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle down hadn't worked. But gush up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a ghost story by Arundhati Roy.
On the line with us is our old friend Lori Wallach, the Executive Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. Tradewatch.org is the website, and well worth booknoting and signing up for their updates. Lori's personal Twitter handle is Wallach Lori, WALLACHLORI, and the one for Trade Watch is PCGTW. As in Public Citizen Global Trade Watch, PCGTW on Twitter, at tradewatch.org on the internet. Lori, welcome back. We have talked, you and I, on numerous occasions about the so-called TRIPS waivers, and I think it's an important time to revisit that and find out where we're at with that. In the first hour of the program today, we were talking with Dr. Eric Feigl-Ding, who's an epidemiologist, former faculty member at Harvard Medical School. And he was talking about how important it is that we get essentially the world vaccinated. The principal barrier to this seems to be patent law. Tell us about it.
So the TRIPS waiver stands for the Agreement on Trade-Related Intellectual Property. It's one part of the WTO where Big Pharma got rules into a so-called free trade agreement obliging 160 countries to guarantee Big Pharma monopoly control for 20 years over not just patents, but also copyrights and industrial designs, and exclusive data, all of which adds up, Tom, to meaning that right now Big Pharma and the handful of makers of effective vaccines have total control over whether more or enough are made, where they're made, what price, what sale, in the face of the worst global health crisis in 100 years. Basically, these rules mean a handful of price-gouging pharmaceutical corporations are making it such that there simply are not enough vaccines being made to end the pandemic.
Right, and we heard from Dr. Feigl-Ding this morning that, you know, there's now a new variant beyond Delta that apparently is popping up in South Africa, the most mutated so far. We really need to vaccinate the world to get this done. Who is blocking, and my understanding from our previous conversations, Lori Wallach, is that the majority of the countries in the world want to produce this so-called TRIPS waiver. They want to sign off on this thing that will guarantee these pharmaceutical companies that they will make money when the drugs that they have developed are being manufactured in third world countries and distributed, you know, more broadly. They just won't make as much money. But where is the roadblock? Where is the barrier?
Well, first, let me just say something very concrete so folks can wrap their heads around what we're talking about. Getting the entire world vaccinated, as your previous guest said, as you're saying, is the way for us to stop the pandemic. There is no plan now to stop the pandemic. And perversely, it's probably in Big Pharma's interest to have wave after wave of variant for which they'll have to create booster after booster. If we want to get our lives back, the whole world needs to get vaccinated, and that's going to take 14 to 15 billion doses. The current companies promised they would have 12 billion this year. Here we are in the 9th month, and they don't have 5 billion out the door, so they're not going to cut it. They haven't been cutting it. They can't make enough. And under these monopoly controls, as you just said, other companies that are willing to pay the creators of the vaccine are just simply forbidden from making more doses, even if they pay the originators. So this is a death spiral scenario. And the great news is in May, President Biden reversed President Trump's opposition to this waiver. The waiver basically unlocks the door and gets us on the path to making more vaccines. The gate is slammed. The intellectual property is monopolized, is constrained. So there are now about 140 countries that want to do this. And at this point, it's literally Germany getting the entire European Union to block the will of 140 other countries. But also, the Biden administration hasn't really stepped up to lead in the 4 months since they announced that they were supporting. So the Biden administration needs to lead. The Germans need to get the heck out of the way, and we can get this done and more vaccines made.
What are the, Lori, we're talking with Lori Wallach, the Executive Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, tradewatch.org. Where are the pressure points that the average person, you know, folks listening to this program can push? Is it a matter of contacting our members of Congress at 202-224-3121, you know, calling your member of the House or your senator? Is it a matter of contacting the White House, you know, at whitehouse.gov, I think it is? There's a form you can fill out. Is it a matter of calling your state representatives? You know, how can we most effect? And obviously, go to tradewatch.org. You know, you may not want to say it, but I will. You know, go to tradewatch.org and learn what you can and sign up to help in any way you can. But how can we bring maximum pressure to make this happen? We need to vaccinate the world, Lori, as you know.
Yep, absolutely. And here's the good news, Tom. This is totally doable. This is a political problem, not a technical problem. Thank goodness we've got the ability to beat this pandemic. Now we have to create the political will. So where it needs to happen is with the White House. And there are two concrete things folks can do. I always suggest folks should call their members of the House of Representatives and their 2 senators. And again, the number you gave is the Capitol switchboard. Folks, all you need to do is give your zip code and they'll connect you to your House member. Then ask that House member's office to send you back to the switchboard. One call and you can get connected right away to all 3, both senators and your House member. And tell them you want a letter or an email sent back to confirm what your senators and your House member are doing to get the Biden administration to step up
on global vaccines with, one, the waiving of the WTO intellectual property barriers, two, funding and pushing our allies to join us in funding more factories around the world to use that access to the intellectual property and make more shots. It's a 1-2 punch. Now, the second thing to do, though, which we've made super easy, is there's actually a person in the Biden administration who's supposed to be doing this. And this is a guy named Jeff Zients. He is the global COVID czar. And we need to all tell him, if he doesn't get these pharma monopolies suspended now, this TRIPS waiver, the pandemic will never end. It's his job to make the damn plan. So if you go to tradewatch.org and you can sign up for action, you can sign up a petition that now already has tens of thousands of people on it. Organizations, health organizations, human rights organizations, labor organizations, basically telling the COVID czar, Jeff Zients, you're representing the president, get your buns in gear.
How do you spell his last name? This is a guy who I didn't even know existed.
Zients. Jeffrey Zients.
Uh-huh. And he works out of the White House. And how do we speak to him?
So he's a very secretive guy. He's been dodging Congress, but we've been able to figure out a way to get petitions basically flooding into him. So if you go to tradewatch.org and you land on that first page, you see sign up for action. And you can sign up right there on this petition to Zients, of which tens of thousands of people are signing, because lots of major organizations are doing it. And we're just going to flood that guy and have Congress also pressuring him so that, he does his job and gets this plan in place.
And then he's the one who leans on Biden to say, okay, it's time, boss, pull the switch or whatever.
Well, and with the UN Global Assembly coming up, another thing is, folks, if you're listening in New York City, there's going to be a big rally protest on the 20th, right at the UN, to push Biden and the other global leaders to make the choice to end the pandemic.
September
this is a
20th.
Leadership thing, and your voice can help.
Got it. Lori Wallach, tradewatch.org. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Lori is so good. TradeWatch. I mean, they do such great work. It is such a great website. We'll be right back. And Ralph Nader created this thing. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Earl in Hyde Park, Illinois. Hey, Earl, thanks for watching us on Free Speech. What's on your mind today?
Oh, not a problem. I enjoy watching your program. Thank you. I quickly want to piggyback on something you and your previous caller were talking about as far as combating the disinformation and how we get our changes made that we need to have made in our society. And I told our screener that, number one, we need to wear out our shoe leather. Number two, we have to be bogardish, but not yelling at one another, because when you start yelling at one another, you're not getting your information through. It's just everybody retreats to their corner, and it's just a yelling match. And we have to be industrious like the grasshopper and the ant. We have to try to outwork them. I doubt if we can outspend them as far as generating money and capital and other stuff to run programs and get our people elected. But we have to outwork them. We have to, try to gain control of the forum when you're with your friends, and try not to yell and scream at one another. Well, you have to be forceful, because one of the tactics that they use is yelling and screaming and preventing you from trying to make your point.
Yeah.
And so it's very effective if you let them, but, you can't not necessarily stoop to their level, but work hard to get your opinions in, and don't let them hog the interview, the talking points or whatever.
Yeah.
So those are things I wanted to talk to you about.
Speak the truth. Yeah, I'm with you. Earl, thank you. Very well said. Saul in Seattle. Hey, Saul, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to call. One of your former callers actually was talking about losing our history. And it seems to me these days a lot of people seem to have forgotten about the American Madison Grant, who greatly inspired Hitler with one of his books, where he was the guy who came up with the whole blonde hair, blue eye theory.
I don't know about that, Saul.
Yeah, so it was during the time in the 1920s of American scientific racism.
Yeah,
this guy actually turns out to be a friend of Theodore Roosevelt and Herbert Hoover's.
Right.
And he wrote a book that actually Hitler read. It was one of the first pieces of propaganda that was translated from English into German and handed out.
This was, was this guy at the head of the eugenics movement here in the United States? I mean, that's really where Hitler got the whole idea for the final solution.
Yeah, and it's weird because not a lot of people even know that this guy exists, and he was like one of the originators of all of these ideas, and you see these ideas being repeated in America right now.
What was the title of his book, Saul?
It was The Passing of the Great Race. It was written in 1916.
1916, The Fascinating. Fascinating. You know, the things I learn, from the people who listen to this program. Saul, thank you for that.
Of course.
I don't know how I missed that. I mean, that's.
Yeah, so he also helped co-found the Redwood League, and he helped fund the Bronx Zoo.
Huh. So he was a wealthy guy and an adherent to scientific racism. Incredible.
Yeah, and he did laws about immigration restriction and anti-miscegenation, race mixing and whatnot, too.
Right. Yeah, which is not surprising. It was part of the whole thing. Saul, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I've got some research to do now. We'll be back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Well, the Confederacy continues to live. Governor Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, just signed a proclamation making April the Confederate Heritage Month in Mississippi. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that it didn't get published on the state's websites. It got published over on Facebook, where there's a good contingent of racists and neo-Confederates to begin with. But what does this say about America, that a part of the country that literally was a police state, a fascist police state, there was no democracy left by 1861 in the South. It was completely controlled by a few thousand families who owned these massive plantations. And in my little riff that's over at ThomHartmann.com for the supporters of our program, I go through some of the details of it. Just the sad, sad history of the South. It is really worth checking out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here, Mary in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. Hey, Mary. Yeah, go ahead, Mary. There's a little rant I wanted to do, but I'll do it after we get off the phone. What's up?
Okay, so I got a letter. I own a small business in Illinois. I got a letter from my commercial insurance company. We have a renewal coming up in October. And in it, it says, your general liability will include a communicable disease exclusion. Your umbrella liability will include a communicable disease exclusion. So what you've been talking about, what you've been talking about the insurance companies are going to get involved, it's happening. This is coming up. This is from Cincinnati insurance companies and private businesses stepping up. So how long before health insurance follows suit and starts coming up with restrictions and exclusions in our health insurance policies?
Oh, it's not going to be long. It's particularly now that you've got at least one vaccine that's got full FDA approval. But that's remarkable. Just to recap, my understanding of what you said, Mary, you own a business. Your business has what's called a liability insurance policy. What that means is if somebody comes into your place of business and slips and falls and breaks their neck and sues you, your insurance company covers that. If one of your employees, gets injured in your place of work, or if you send a product to somebody and it blows up in their face when they open the box by accident, you are covered for liability. And what your liability insurance company just said to you essentially is If somebody comes into your place of business and gets COVID, or if one of your workers gets COVID and gives it to a non-employee or gets it, whatever. If COVID is spreading in your business, inside your business, and somebody decides to sue you because they got COVID or somebody related to them got it and died and they're suing on behalf of the estate, we will no longer cover you. Is that
we
what
will
they
not
said?
cover you. Yep. Yeah.
Amazing. So it begins. Mary, thank you very much for that.
Sure thing.
I do appreciate it. The rant I wanted to share with you, it was very, very straightforward and very brief, and then I'll get right back to your phone calls. I want to thank Joe Biden. I don't think enough of us are saying this out loud. I don't think enough of us are saying this clearly enough. It's easy to start a war, relatively speaking. Even a little war. I mean, Reagan had his little war with Grenada. Bush the first had his little war with Iraq. It's easy to start a war. It's damn hard to end a war. Jerry Ford ended Vietnam. And now Joe Biden has ended Afghanistan, and he deserves credit for that. And I realize, Trump did everything he could. It was by my earlier rant about how he tried to salt the ground, how he tried to make it an absolute cluster, a total screwed up mess for Biden. Donald Trump did his best. He tried so hard to screw things up in Afghanistan that his defense secretary, who was a hardcore right-winger, Mark Esper, good Republican, quit his job. And when Joe Biden came into office, there were a bunch of people, a bunch of dead-enders in the State Department and in the Pentagon who were saying, that was Trump. He tried to end the war. He promised he would end the war. He campaigned against the war. So let's just ignore that and go back to having a war. Let's go another 20 years. And Biden, whose son had served in Afghanistan, said no. This war is over. Now, he hasn't come out and said what I've said and others are saying fairly clearly, which is that, if this war was lost, it was lost the day it was declared. I mean, it was never declared by Congress, but it was lost when we signed, when George W. Bush started bombing Afghanistan. Or you could argue it was lost 3 weeks later when the Afghan government fell and George W. Bush decided to start maintaining a long-term occupation of Afghanistan, which would then shovel hundreds of billions of dollars into his vice president's company, Halliburton. Or you could argue that the war was lost in December of 2001 when the Taliban tried to negotiate a surrender with the Bush administration and Donald Rumsfeld said no. But the war was lost from the beginning. And George W. Bush was president for 8 years of that war and did nothing to end it. Barack Obama was president for 8 years of that war and did nothing to end it, to the best of my knowledge. Donald Trump was president for 4 years of that war and did nothing constructive to end it. He tried to sabotage the guy who followed him. But he could have ended it 3 or 4 years earlier if he really believed that was what was right. And Joe Biden stood up and said, I'm going to end this war. Enough Americans have died. Enough Afghans have died. Enough. It's not something that we can win. We're wasting lives and blood and treasure. And I think it's important that somebody, particularly somebody who's characterized as the far left, as I often am, which, I think I'm kind of the far middle, but whatever, comes out and says it, and just says it out loud. Thank you, Joe Biden. Thank you, President Biden. He's getting some serious flack for this, but that will pass. And I think the majority of Americans are very grateful. The president's going to address the nation probably in the next hour or two anyway. We'll see what he has to say. But I just wanted to say that. I'll pick up your phone calls after the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Your calls right after this. For our book club today, we're reading Out of the Wreckage, A New Politics for an Age of Crisis by George Monbiot. This is from Chapter 3, Don't Look Back. The political history of the second half of the 20th century could be summarized as the conflict between its two great narratives, neoliberalism and social democracy. Social democracy in this era, whose story I briefly summarized in Chapter 1, acquired much of its power and coherence from the thinking of one remarkable man. Across 4 decades, John Maynard Keynes's work dominated economic thought and practice. During the period the French called the Trente Glorieuses, 1945 to 1975, his prescriptions are widely credited with reviving economies and distributing their benefits. That they remain more or less the only mainstream alternative to neoliberalism today reveals a remarkable stagnation of both thought and ambition. The first and most obvious problem with an attempt to use Keynesian social democracy as a core political narrative is that the story is more than 80 years old. Political stories need to be renewed. If politics does not feel fresh, it struggles to kindle the imaginative excitement from which hope arises. The second problem is that the surviving enthusiasm for Keynes among mainstream parties is highly selective. It has been reduced in most cases to lowering interest rates when economies are sluggish and engaging in tepid counter-cyclical public spending, which means injecting public money into the economy when unemployment is high or recession threatens. Other Keynesian measures, such as raising taxes when an economy grows quickly to dampen the boom-bust cycle, the fixed exchange rate system, capital controls, and a self-balancing global banking system, an international clearing union, all of which Keynes saw as essential complements to these policies, have been discarded and forgotten. Not only does this ensure that the rich old story has been reduced to 2 thin chapters, whose loss of context destroys their narrative power, but the absence of other Keynesian measures, as well as changed global circumstances, weakens the effectiveness of the remaining elements of policy. Let me give you an example. In 2009, in the hope of boosting the economy in the wake of the financial crash, the British government spent £300 million on stimulating sales of new cars. Under its scrappage scheme, if car owners traded in their old vehicles for new ones, the government, with the help of manufacturers, knocked £2,000 off the price. This lavish program was partly justified as an environmental measure, though it was clear from the outset that it would lead to a rise in environmental impacts as the materials and energies used in manufacturing new cars outweigh any likely savings from better fuel economy. Its primary purpose was to boost British car assembly plants and protect the jobs of their workers. But European state aid rules forbade such schemes from discriminating between cars made in Britain and cars made abroad. British car parts assembled only some 15% of the vehicles sold in that country, which meant that 85% of the benefit went to car plants in Germany, Japan, and other manufacturing nations. We could see this spending as foreign aid to some of the world's richest nations. The current pattern of globalization, which developed partly as a result of abandoning the fixed exchange rates and capital controls that Keynes advocated, ensures that this problem is to some extent repeated wherever Keynesian stimulus spending is applied. It might lead to a general, if scarcely detectable, global economic uplift, but the domestic impact will necessarily be weaker than Keynes intended. This issue is compounded by the phenomena of job-free growth, caused in part by the automation now spreading into almost every economic sector. Today, governments pull the starter cord, spending public money and cutting interest rates, that ignited the economy and employment in the past, only to discover that it snaps before the motor fires. 2 feeble measures, removed from the rich framework of thought and narrative in which they were once embedded, have little chance of sustaining a political revival. Another issue is that the troubles that beset the Keynesian model in the 1970s have not disappeared. While the oil embargo of '73 was the immediate trigger for the lethal combination of high inflation and high unemployment, called stagflation back then, that Keynesian policies were almost powerless to counteract. Problems with the system had been mounting for years. Falling productivity and rising costs push inflation, wages and prices pursuing each other upwards, were already beginning to erode support for Keynesian economics. Most importantly, perhaps, the program had buckled in response to the political demands of capital. Strong financial regulations and controls on the movement of money began to weaken in the 1950s as governments started to liberalize financial markets. Richard Nixon's decision in '71 to suspend the convertibility of dollars into gold
destroyed the system of fixed exchange rates on which much of the success of Keynes's policies depended. The capital controls introduced to prevent financiers and speculators from sucking money out of balanced Keynesian economies collapsed. Today, it's hard to find a mainstream politician in Europe or the Anglophone nations, including those who call themselves Keynesians, prepared to call for their reintroduction. We cannot hope that the strategies deployed by global finance that helped to destroy the efficacy of Keynes's measures in the 70s will be unlearned. If the soft Keynesianism proposed by opponents of neoliberalism is to amount to anything but tinkering, it has to confront a wider set of challenges than most of its advocates have yet been prepared to acknowledge. But perhaps the biggest problem residual Keynesianism confronts in the 21st century is that when it does work, it collides headfirst with the environmental crisis. The book, Out of the Wreckage by George Monbiot. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we have a new video over at thomhartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, it's being characterized in the media as being just, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get the adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies, and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is, this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma, a serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Alejandro in Miami. Hey, Alejandro, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hello. I'm sorry, Tom. Let me turn off the radio. I know it's annoying when you do this.
That's quite all right. What's on your mind?
I just like to hear you showing the leg. But anyways, yes, I wanted to make a point about the ivermectin thing. It just seems to be another stupid drug trend among these anti-vaxxer idiots. And I'm just curious, what is the origin of these ivermectin drug nonsense? Like, who's pushing this? Are doctors behind this somehow? And if they are, why isn't anyone filing complaints against our medical boards for this? This is irresponsible, just like those stupid frontline doctors, that they should not have any more, they should not have medical licenses. We need to go after those quack doctors and other so-called doctors who push this nonsense, because they need to suffer the consequences of their misinformation. So I just, wanted to, I guess, throw that at you and see what your thoughts were on that.
I think you've asked the $64,000 question, Alejandro. What little I know about this is that there was a so-called study submitted for publication by a group in Egypt, and submitted for publication to a scientific journal. And in some cases, you publish these in what are called preprint journals, which is where they have not been peer-reviewed. It's just like an early look at promising research. This was they claimed that they did this study of ivermectin and that they found that it actually reduced COVID infections, and therefore we should be using this. As within days of this being published in this obscure little kind of corner of the internet, it was debunked. There were, they discovered, number one, that the large chunks of the language in it had been plagiarized from other studies, just like the scientific sounding bits and pieces of it, number one. Number two, they could find no record of the actual, drug being administered to people and people being measured for safety and efficacy. In other words, there was no study. And number three, they just, the numbers and therefore the conclusions were just made up. And the study was withdrawn. It didn't even get as far as peer review. The people behind it were discredited. Now, the question that you're raising, which I don't know the answer to, is who were those people behind it? What was their motivation? Were they just,
Was it just some teenagers trying to see if they could get something out there? Was it some foreign government that's trying to mess with us or the world? I mean, what possible benefit, or, was it some company that makes ivermectin? I think that's the least probable because it's not a drug that is under patent any longer, so it's generic and it's, ubiquitous. It's all over the world. Or is it possible that it was even, somebody who just didn't know how to do a study well, who had the best of intentions? We don't, or at least I don't know the answer to those questions. And if any of you listening know the answer to those questions, let me know. And there, you can reach me. Probably Twitter is the easiest way to reach me. So number one. But then number two, once that study, even after it was withdrawn, the study that I was mentioning earlier, where I'm hearing from people, over at the National Institutes of Health, there's a study about ivermectin, and it's a study of studies, right? And that study of studies includes a study of the original study that was debunked. And so therefore, hey, it shows that maybe this stuff works. Well, that's because you're basing your statistics on a lie. And on a study that is a lie. And it's just like it's taken on a life of its own. And it's taken on a life of its own among these people who are these tribal true believers of Donald Trump, who oddly enough is not taking ivermectin. He took the vaccine. But, but he did it in secret. It took 2 months for us to find out that Trump and his wife and son had all been vaccinated. So, yeah. But I think you've asked the big question, and I hope that we eventually find out the answer. Alejandro, thank you for the call. Kirk in Lakeland, Florida. Hey, Kirk, thanks for listening to WMNF. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for your program. To be concise, I'm a medical device distributor. Last year, when COVID really started taking hold, we got a lot of requests for devices, masks, tests, things like that. My point of this story is that 2 weeks ago, I had a customer looking for a number of masks. So we went searching with my friend and I, and we were presented with these masks from Hanes. And I said,
the
Hanes,
underwear company?
Yes. And so if people don't know this, I said, that's really strange. So there's a story behind it. I found out that Jared Kushner got in behind Hanes, had them produce masks for every man, woman, and child in the U.S., and they were supposed to be sent out. Now,
oh, yeah, the Postal Service was going to distribute them. That was in March of last year, and then they canceled that in April after the April 7th headline that black people were dying out of proportion to white people. That's when everything changed.
Well, it turns out that it also sounds like that they produced a mask, and it didn't, by all appearances, look like a jockstrap on your face, and that's what the comments were. But the more disturbing part about this, Tom, is really this. These masks are being sold on the market for pennies on the dollar because they never got used. Now, my question is... So they got dumped into some sort of surplus market. Yeah, but is the taxpayer on the hook for those Hanes masks? Because if they are, then they're being resold again. And and I don't understand that because it seems like the taxpayer owns it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I recalled and reported on and have written about when Kushner was taking this seriously in February and March of last year, he had cut this deal. I didn't know it was Hanes, but he had cut a deal to have masks. In fact, I thought he was going to import them from China. But anyhow, he had these masks, and they were going to mail them. And the U.S. Postal Service, Louis DeJoy was in on this, the U.S. Postal Service was going to distribute 5 masks to every family in America. That was the deal, if I'm remembering correctly. What I didn't know is that they had actually been made, which means that they were almost certainly paid for. So I'm guessing that they just got dumped into a surplus market. But there's a story for some intrepid reporter to run down. That's a fascinating one.
And my other last point was that, I was speaking with one of my friends yesterday, and we were just talking, because I live in Florida, and we were talking about the treatment, I can't remember, the monoclonal antibody treatment that the governor is professing to use. And when we were talking about that, it basically says, no prescription needed, come in, you can get it any time. And you and I have said, the taxpayer is likely on the hook for this bill. But then the other side of that, too, is that, I don't know if people know anything about stem cell science or anything like that. But, you know, I know there was a real big pushback against stem cell science years ago by the evangelicals. And there's a clear, Regeneron has a clear statement about their use of, you know, stem cells in their treatment. And so I do think it's a bit of irony too, where
that's interesting.
Evangelicals,
they're hysterical because one of the vaccines was, you know, tested for whether it was dangerous to human cells on a cell line, on an aborted cell line at one point, or very early in the development process. But they're fine with Regeneron. You know, I mean, they're shoveling it out the door down there in Florida. That was similarly tested.
Yeah, the procurement of stem cells is an interesting thing. You can watch it because I had another company that sold it as well, and essentially they're using third-party consenting mothers. Whatchamacallit? Gosh, now
ova.
They're using the placenta. No, placenta. And so what they do is they harvest cells from the placental tissue. But you should watch it. The mechanical. It's basically just cutting the thing up. Yeah. And making it into small enough particles, desiccating it, and then making it into another formulation. But it's an interesting thing, again, where, you know, we were totally against stem cell science, but now it's saving lives. And listen, I am not against that. Yeah. I think that Regeneron is fine. I just think that it's just weird when people don't.
Yeah, we're very selective in our outrage here. Kirk, thank you. That fascinating stuff. Barry in Chicago. Hey, Barry, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I want to say that, of course, I agree with you wholeheartedly that it was time to leave Afghanistan, and Biden did that, which was surprising to me, but it's great that he did it, and he deserves to be commended for that. But I think sometimes perhaps you're losing a bit of critical thinking here in the want to defend Joe Biden, in that, you know, his strategy for leaving, I mean, yeah, there's chaos when you went to war, quote unquote. You can say that. War is chaos in general. But there were Democrats warning him for months about the proper exit strategy and trying to appeal to him. And there's correspondence that they sent him, and he didn't listen.
I know.
And so I think
actually, the story gets a little more nuanced than that. But yes, there were things that could have been done months earlier, particularly getting out some of our allies from the farther regions of Afghanistan. You know, Barry, I think at a certain point you just have to you have to say, you know, he did the best he could with what he had. I can't believe that Joe Biden or frankly even Donald Trump would, well, God only knows with Trump, but would sit around and say, you know, I'm going to screw up the end of this war. I just, you know, and he's got over 100,000 people out of there, you know, which is pretty good. Barry, I get it. You know, you want to be upset with him. Go for it. But I'm not going to be.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. James in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks. I want to thank you for all the years that you've been so astute and kept us all in truth. And just thank you very much, Dr. Hartmann. I just really appreciate you.
Thank you, James. I get more out of it than I put into it.
Maybe so, but you're great. I've asked a question of a lot of people over the years. I just have never been able to understand the Senate. And you know, we just had a lecture here on quantum physics, so that was really timely. I'm just trying to do the math, sir. I don't understand how these people can hold progress hostage forever like they've always done. The math doesn't work out, and I've had people in other countries make fun of our government structure whenever it's brought up, and it just doesn't work out, does it? We've got New York State's got 2 votes, South Dakota's got 2 votes, California's got 2 votes, North Dakota's got 2 votes. These people are different in numbers and in thinking, but explain it to me, Tom. How did we get this?
Well, it was in part the transition from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution.
In other words, ancient stuff.
Yeah, it really is. It's legacy stuff.
We're antiquated.
We had 13 colonies that all had very, very different histories. You know, Pennsylvania was largely started by the Penn family that were on, you know, and they were kind of on, at one point on a religious tear. Massachusetts had been, you know, in the 1600s, Massachusetts and New Hampshire had been taken over by the Puritans. They were having wars with the Quakers. You had Virginia, which was, you know, sort of the hotbed of what you might today call democratic, small d democratic or small r Republican thinking. And yet it was a slave state, but it was the most anti-slavery of the slave states. You had, you know, people like Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson speaking out against slavery while they were holding slaves, which was totally bizarre. Then you had Georgia, South Carolina, which were all in on slavery, and, you know, John C. Calhoun of South Carolina calling it a positive good in the U.S. Senate. And so, you know, all these different states had different histories, had different backgrounds, had different interests, and when under the Articles of Confederation, you know, when we won the Revolutionary War in 1783, we created basically a trade agreement among these 13 colonies. And, but that was all it was. You know, the Articles of Confederation did not really create a federal government. There were 3 presidents who preceded George Washington, but we don't acknowledge any of them because there was really no federal government. It was just a giant trade deal. And it wasn't working. And it was putting all, you know, the future at risk. And so the whole idea of the Constitution was to pull those 13 colonies together into one country. But they still had these highly discrete identities, even local dialects, even in some cases, you know, non-English languages that were widely spoken. You know, in Louisiana, Creole, for example, although that wasn't part of the original 13. And so the consequence of this was that, you know, they did the House by population and they did the Senate by state because these states were demanding that their integrity be preserved. We're way past that now, James, and I really think that either we need to break California into 3 states, break New York, Texas, and Florida into 2 states each, or add a couple of, you know, add Puerto Rico and add Washington, D.C. We got to do something because right now Republicans in the Senate represent 40 million fewer people than do Democrats in the Senate, yet they veto everything. James, I got to run. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartmann Report and over at ThomHartmann.com. And on Hartmann Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program. And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box. Check it out at HartmannReport.com. And, of course, over at ThomHartmann.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week that, you know, does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program, of ThomHartmann.com. And the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Philip in Neenah, Wisconsin. Hey, Philip, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Great show. I really enjoy listening to you. But I have some pushback. And I just think that you aren't critical enough on, and I am a left-leaning person, but I just feel like you just fan the flames of with Trump. You always bring him up about the emails you get, and I don't see you being too critical on the Democratic side of things as much as I would have hoped. But I am in your corner, and I appreciate your show.
Okay. Thank you, Philip. Ronnie in New Berlin, Wisconsin. Hey, Ronnie, what's on your mind?
Hi there. Thanks for taking my call. So a couple, maybe an hour ago, there was a guy talking about when he was in high school and protesting, and a lot of times you're talking about how we forget our history.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking, I'm 57, so my educational years were in the 70s and up to the mid-80s, college, a 4-year degree in college. And I can tell you, every year in grade school, high school, and college, we never finished our history. It would be divided into 2 parts, 1492 to 1770, or no, to 1850, and then 1850 to present. Well, it would be end of May, and we'd only be, finishing getting Hitler out of power. And so, literally, we never learned about any of this stuff in school, any of our recent history.
Yeah.
It's through movies, it's through seeing our own news, reading books that have any kind of historical background in them. And now granted, I've been out of school for 40 years now, almost 40 years. Hopefully that has changed, but I know that we never got up to our recent history.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of the problem. I remember those current event films. We'd have them every Friday, and it was like, oh, this is kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they still do that, but, a lot of people just never learned of the Vietnam War and the Korean War and Watergate and, any of this stuff. So I have no idea what kids are learning as far as today's history, political history, American history.
Yeah. Well, there's the
do
old.
They study Barack Obama getting elected?
Yeah. There's the old saying that those who control the past control the future. If you can control history, you can control the present, and controlling history means controlling education, and that's this is where I think that Ronald Reagan really. This is going to be the 360, Sean. Ronald Reagan really needs to be called out on this. I mean, he put a guy in charge of the education department, which was overseeing getting grants and resources to schools to teach the kind of history that you're talking about, Ronnie. He put a guy in charge who was named Bill Bennett. And this is what Bill Bennett had to say on ABC News.
But I do know that it's true that if you wanted to reduce crime, you could, if that were your sole purpose, you could abort every black baby in this country and your crime rate would go down. That would be an impossible, ridiculous, and morally reprehensible thing to do. But your crime rate would go down.
This is the kind of thinking that was inside the Reagan administration. So, and to this moment, it's still, oh my God, you want to teach the true racial history of America or our screw-ups in other areas? You can't do that. So that's what's going on, Ronnie.
Yeah.
Anyhow, thank you very much for the call. Yeah, good talking to you. Gar in Decatur, Georgia. Hey, Gar, what's on your mind?
How you doing, Tom?
Good.
Quickly, have you ever heard of Smedley Butler?
I have, yeah. He's the guy that
he said war is a racket.
Yeah, the right-wingers tried to hire him to kidnap Roosevelt.
My thing is, war is not ended pretty. I mean, it's not an end of a novel or it's not an end of a book. It's end of war. And Smedley Butler, he foiled attempt to assassinate FDR.
Yeah, he did.
They would want to attempt.
He did, and he was the most decorated Marine general in the history of the United States at the time.
Yep. He said war is a racket.
Yep.
And you can go online and check out his book if anybody's interested.
Oh, he starts right out in that book by saying, I was the guy who was there on behalf of the big corporations and the fat cats, basically robbing, raping, and plundering other countries. It's brilliant. It's an absolutely brilliant book, Gar. Gar, thank you. Thanks for invoking Smedley Butler. I love it. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us to participate. Thus, the demos in democracy. That's Greek for person, I'm pretty sure. People. That's us, right? So get out there, get active, tag you're it. Have a great afternoon. Be kind to yourself and those around you, okay? Let's all practice doing a good deed today. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.